I found my mother-in-law feeding my son, not with a bottle, with her own body. He was 4 months old that afternoon. She had not asked me, not once. I want to tell you the whole thing, slowly, the way it actually happened, because the first time I say it out loud, people gasp, and then they wait for the villain. There isn't one. That is the part nobody believes. Let me take you back. I'll start at the end because that is where I understood it. It was a Tuesday, rain. I was sitting in my car in a hospital parking lot at 8:40 in the evening. The engine was off. The wipers were off. Water ran down the windshield in lines. Through the glass I could see the emergency room doors, two of them, sliding, red letters above. My twins were inside. My husband Kaelan was standing near the doors in a gray jacket. His mother Zarelda sat in the waiting room. I could see the back of her head. Row 3, blue chairs. I had been sitting in that car for 11 minutes. The clock on the dash said 8:51 now. My hands were on the wheel, the keys were in my lap. I could have walked in. It was 40 steps to the door. I counted them once earlier, going the other way. Nobody was fighting. Nobody was yelling. I want you to understand that. There was no scene. There was just a family that had run out of a way to talk to each other. And I was in a parking lot in the rain, trying to remember how we got here. I picked up my phone, a photo loaded. It was a page from my old feeding notebook, a sentence in my own handwriting. I read it 3 times. It said, "I don't know when I stopped feeling like the person who knew my own baby best." I closed my eyes. For weeks I had believed one thing. I believed my mother-in-law crossing that line was the moment everything broke, that the breastfeeding was the crime. Later I learned something worse. The line had been moving for months, long before either of us noticed. She didn't jump over a wall that night. She just took one more step across a floor that had been tilting the whole time. So let me go back further, 5 months earlier, to the house where everyone helped. Our house was chaos back then, not the sad kind. The newborn kind. 2 Bobbies crying on different schedules. 4 laundry baskets in the hallway, half a sandwich on the arm of the couch drying out since noon, and wedding boxes everywhere. My sister-in-law, Olivian, was getting married in 6 weeks, so our house became the family headquarters. People came and went from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. There were 30 boxes of invitations in the dining room, ribbon on every chair. Before my twins were born, I thought having family close would make everything easier. I really did, and honestly, at first, it did. I remember standing in the doorway one evening. It was 6 p.m. Zarelda was at the stove making soup. Kaelan was on the floor with a screwdriver building the second crib. Olivian sat at the table labeling 200 envelopes. Everyone was doing something for someone. It looked like love. It was love. The soup smelled like my own grandmother's kitchen. There was music playing low from a speaker on the counter. Someone had folded the laundry I'd left for 2 days. All 14 tiny outfits stacked in a neat pile. I hadn't asked anyone to do it. It was just done. I stood there and my eyes filled up, not from sadness, from the opposite. I thought I have never been this held in my life. 2 Bobbies and a house full of people who love them. Some women do this alone. I had a whole army. I want to be fair to all of them. Nobody in this story woke up wanting to hurt me. Hold that thought. You will need it. Because 6 weeks later, that same army felt like an occupation, and nothing had changed except me. That is the strange part. The kindness never changed, only the wall I built to hold it back. Let me tell you who I am so this makes sense. I work as a museum restoration specialist. I fix damaged paintings and old objects. That is my job, and the first rule of my job is simple. Before you touch anything, you photograph it. Every crack, every stain, you document what it was before you change it. So on my first week home, I sat on the nursery floor and photographed the room, not for memories, for documentation. I took 42 pictures in one afternoon. Kaelan walked in and laughed. He said, "Are you restoring the nursery too?" I smiled. I said, "Old habits." Let me tell you about my job because it explains me. I spend my days with objects that are 100, 200, 300 years old. A cracked oil painting. A wooden saint with a missing hand. My work is slow. A single canvas can take me 8 months. You clean 1 square inch at a time. You test everything twice. You never rush because a rushed repair destroys the thing you love. I once spent 3 weeks just deciding how to lift 40 years of yellow varnish off a painting the size of a book. 3 weeks, deciding, not doing, that is who I am. But here is the thing I believe, the thing that runs my whole life. You can't repair something if you don't understand what changed. That sounds healthy. It mostly is. But it hides a flaw. I need to know everything before I let anything move. And a newborn is not an oil painting. A baby will not hold still for 8 months while you study it. Motherhood asked me to move fast and trust my hands. And that was the one thing I did not know how to do. That same night at 11:15, Kalen asked me a simple question. He said, "Did you sleep?" I said, "I'm fine." I had slept 3 hours in 2 days. I was not fine, I just could not say it. Now let me tell you about Zarelda because you need to like her. Everyone did. She walked into our kitchen one morning carrying 4 things: groceries, a pack of 80 diapers, a container of homemade food still warm, and a phone charger because Kalan's had frayed the week before. Nobody had asked for any of it, but every single item was something we needed. Olivian looked at her and said, "How do you always know?" Zarelda laughed. She said, "Because nobody tells me until it's already a problem." Everyone laughed with her. I laughed too. It was funny. It was also the whole story in one sentence. I have to say something true about her. In my worst weeks, she saved me 100 times. When I got mastitis at 3 weeks and a fever of 101, she drove 25 minutes at midnight with medicine and a hot compress. When I cried on the bathroom floor at day 12, she sat with me and said nothing for an hour. She was not a monster. She was the best help I ever had. Remember that when the hard part comes. It is why the hard part was so hard. She raised 3 kids and buried her own mother and ran a house for 35 years. She knew things I did not know. When my son had his first fever, she knew from the doorway that it was teething and not sickness. And she was right. She was almost always right. That was the gift. It was also the trap closing. But I noticed something small. I noticed small things. It's the job. Zarelda never said, "Do you need this?" She said, "I brought this." She skipped the question. She went straight to the answer. At the time, it felt like generosity. It was. It was also a habit with no breaks. The first real crack was almost nothing. I was on the couch feeding one twin, my daughter. It was 4 in the afternoon. My son started crying in the bouncer 2 feet away. Zarelda's hand moved toward him, fast, like a reflex. And I stood up. I don't even know why. My body just did it. I stepped between her and my son. It was one awkward second, that's all, but she saw it. She stopped. She pulled her hand back. She said, "Sorry, I forget you're still getting used to sharing them." And I felt guilty. That's the trap. She wasn't grabbing. She was reaching to help a crying baby, and I had made it into a wall. Later, Kalan sat next to me. He said, "You know she loves them." I said, "I know." Then I said the truest thing I said that whole month. I said, "That's what makes it harder." Because if she were cruel, I could push back. But she loved my kids, and you can't fight love. You can only lose to it slowly. I told you about the notebook. Let me show you what it really was. Every feeding, I wrote it down. The date, the time to the minute, which twin, their mood before, their mood after. On March 3rd, I have an entry at 2:47 a.m. and another at 5:19 a.m. Small handwriting. Blue pen. Kalan saw me writing one night. He said, "You still track everything." I said, "Not everything." Then I said, "Just the things I don't want to forget." That was the real me. People thought I was controlling. I wasn't. I was scared. I was scared the moments would disappear. My kids were 4 months old and already different from the week before. The notebook was me holding on, 10 grams of paper against time. Now the week before the incident, this is where the pressure built. Little things, watch them stack. Thing 1, Zarelda bought a new brand of bottles, 6 of them. She said, "These worked better for Lorik." Lorik was one of her own bobbies 30 years ago. I said, "We already found one that works." She said, of course. She returned all 6 the next day. She got the $23 back, but something stayed behind. Thing 2, she changed the nursery lighting. She swapped the bright bulb for a soft one 40 watts lower, because she had noticed the twins slept better in dim light. And they did. She was right. That was the problem. She was so often right that being wrong felt impossible to argue. Thing 3, this is the quiet one. Kalen called his mother and said, Mireya is having a hard week. He meant it kindly. He wanted her to go easy on me, but I had never told her that. I had told him, and he passed it on. So now Zarelda knew something about me that I had chosen not to share. And she loved me, so she acted on it. A triangle formed, 3 people, one of them me standing outside a conversation about my own life. Then came the afternoon. It was a Thursday, around 4:30. Both twins woke up hungry at the same minute. That almost never happened. I had slept maybe 9 hours across the last 4 nights. My hands were shaking a little. Low blood sugar. I had eaten 1 banana since morning. I started feeding my daughter. My son screamed, real screaming, the kind that climbs. Zarelda came in. She held out her arms. She said, give me him for a minute. I hesitated, then I handed him over. I want to be exact here. I let her hold him. I did not tell her to feed him. Holding was the whole agreement in my head. She walked out of the room with him, toward the guest room. I heard the door click, a soft sound. I remember thinking nothing of it. That is the thing about the worst moments. They arrive dressed as ordinary ones. I kept feeding my daughter, my eyes half closed. I was so tired the room felt underwater. The clock on the wall said 4:38. Minutes passed, 4 maybe 5, and the screaming stopped, just stopped, too fast. That is what my body noticed first. The quiet was too clean. A bottle takes time. A baby that upset takes a minute to settle onto a bottle. He fights it. He arches. He needs 5 or 10 minutes to calm. But this quiet came in under 2. My body knew the math before my mind did. Something was wrong with the timing. Something did not add up. When my daughter finished, I went to find them. I opened the guest room door. Zarelda was sitting in the chair by the window. My son was asleep against her, deeply asleep, his face soft, his breathing slow. And I noticed the way he was lying, the angle, the closeness. Something in me already knew, and my mouth caught up a second later. I said, did you give him the bottle? She looked up at me, no fear on her face, no guilt, nothing hidden. She said no. There was a pause, 3 seconds, it felt like a minute. She said, I fed him. I didn't understand. I said, what do you mean? And she said it plainly, quietly, like it was ordinary. She said, I breastfed him. I want you to sit in that silence with me, because the room did not turn evil. Nobody screamed. There was no music. There was just a woman in a chair holding my sleeping son and me in a doorway, not breathing. I remember counting the flowers on the guest room curtains. There were 9 of them in the panel I could see. My brain did that. It ran away to something small and countable while the big things sank in. That is what shock feels like. You notice the curtains, you count the flowers, you cannot look at the center of it yet. And here is the part that broke something. She did not look ashamed. She looked certain. She looked like she had done the right thing. That was worse than any apology, because I could not argue with a person who believed all the way down that she had helped. Guilt I could have worked with. Guilt bends. Certainty does not bend. Certainty is a stone. I did not scream. I want you to know that. Part of me wishes I had. It would have been cleaner. Instead, I just felt the floor tilt. I felt something quietly come loose inside me, some thread that had connected me to being the person who knew my own baby best. It didn't snap. It slipped. And a slipped thread is much harder to find again than a snapped one. That was the end of the beginning. Now I have to tell you what happened after, because the after was longer and stranger than the moment itself. I stood in that guest room for a while. I had imagined many reactions from her over the years. An apology, an excuse, embarrassment. I had a script in my head for each one. I had no script for calm. She adjusted his blanket, a small, tender motion, tucked it under his arm. It was the gentlest thing and it made everything worse. I asked her one question. I said, "Did you ask me?" She paused, not because she didn't know, because she did. She said no, one word, no excuse attached. I said, "Why?" She said, "Because he was crying." And I realized she wasn't answering my question at all. I asked why she did it without asking. She answered why she helped. Those are two different questions. She could only hear the one inside her own head. We moved to the kitchen. The twins were asleep now, both of them by 5:40, so we whispered. It was strange. The two people who didn't know the world had changed were the only ones sleeping. I said, "You can't make that decision for me." She said, "I know, then I should have told you." And for 1 second I thought she understood. My chest loosened. I thought we were okay. Then she added, "But if I had waited, he would have stayed hungry." And the apology vanished just like that. She took it back with a "but." I said the sentence I still think about. I said, "You keep explaining why you did it. I'm asking why you thought you could." That was the whole fight, right there. She was defending her heart. I was asking about my permission. We were having two different arguments in the same kitchen. Kalen came home at 6:15. He walked in the door and knew instantly. You could see it hit him. His shoulders dropped. And his first instinct was to fix it, not to feel it, to fix it. He said, "Okay, what happened?" We both started talking at once, two voices. He raised one hand, not angry, just drowning. He said, "Can we slow down?" I heard something he did not say. I heard, "Your feelings are too much." He meant, "I don't want this to get worse." Same four words, two different meanings. That gap is where a lot of marriages get stuck. He took us apart, first me in the bedroom. I said, "Someone made a parenting decision without me." He nodded, he got it. Then he talked to his mother alone for 20 minutes. She told him, "I watched my grandson panic while his mother was exhausted. I made a choice." And he got that too. That was his flaw. He thought that understanding both sides meant the job was done. He thought fairness was a resting place. He did not know yet that a person can be completely understandable and still completely wrong, both at the same time. The next day, the wedding machine kept running. That was almost the cruelest part. The invitations still needed stamps. The soup still got made. Life did not pause for my heartbreak. Olivian found me in the hallway. She asked carefully, "Are we okay?" I said, "I don't know." And then a relative called, an aunt. She had heard a shorter version of the story. Someone had told her Zarelda helped feed the baby. That's all, 3 soft words instead of the real ones. The aunt said, "Honestly, thank goodness she was there." Then 2 more relatives said versions of the same thing over the next 24 hours. One texted a heart. One called Zarelda a saint. Not one of them asked me a single question about how I felt, because in the short version there was no wound. There was only a helpful grandmother. The wound lived in the details and nobody had the details. Nobody attacked me, do you see? That's what hurt. They weren't cruel, they were grateful. They were praising the exact thing that had cut me open. I was standing in a room where everyone loved me and everyone was celebrating my wound. And I understood for the first time in my life how a person can be surrounded by love and still be completely alone. The love was real. It just wasn't pointed at the right thing. It was aimed at a story I wasn't in. That night I stood at the bathroom mirror at 1 a.m. I looked 10 years older than my age. And I did something I didn't want to do. I looked at myself honestly. I remembered the last 3 weeks. I remembered refusing help every time. I remembered saying I'm fine at least 20 times. I remembered taking every single night shift, all 21 of them that month. I remembered correcting people, little corrections, not like that. He likes it this way. I remembered insisting out loud and often that I knew the Bobbies best. And I asked myself a hard question. Did I build a situation where someone felt they had to step in? I want to be clear, that did not excuse her. It didn't, but it wasn't only her story, it was mine too. My flaw showed its face in that mirror. I wanted the perfect explanation before I would let myself be hurt. I needed to be 100% right before I could be honestly sad. And nobody is ever 100% right. While I stood at that mirror, Zarelda was sitting alone in the guest room. I learned this later from Kaylan. She was looking at a photo. Kaylan as a baby 34 years ago in a hospital blanket. She had opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. Inside were old things. A hospital bracelet the size of a bottle cap, 2 tiny shirts, a rattle. Her phone rang, her husband calling from out of town. He asked, "Everything okay?" She said yes. But she was crying. Kaylan saw the tissues the next morning, 6 of them in the small trash can. Here is what I understand now about that night. When she fed my son, it was not a plan. It was not a takeover. Holding him, feeling him calm against her, it dropped her 30 years into the past. Back to when she was the center of a small person's whole world. She didn't want my role. She missed her own. She missed the version of herself who was needed every single day. And that woman had been gone a long time. Think about her life for a second. For 35 years, someone woke her at 2 a.m. because they needed her. For 35 years, she was the first call for every fever, every heartbreak, every flat tire. And then the kids grew up. The calls got shorter. Her husband traveled 3 weeks a month. Her house went quiet. And a quiet house for a woman who built her whole self around being needed is not peace. It is a kind of grief nobody sends flowers for. So when my son cried and she picked him up and he stopped, some part of her woke up that had been asleep for years. For 40 seconds she was 34 again. She was essential. She forgot herself so completely that she forgot me. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. And human is harder to be angry at. It is easy to hate a villain. It is very hard to hate a lonely person who loves your children. That was the trap I lived in for 5 months. I wanted to be furious, and I kept running into her sadness instead. Late that night, I opened my notebook to write it down. I wrote the date, then I stopped. My pen just hovered there. Because I didn't know what category it went in. Was it help, a mistake, a betrayal, an emergency? All 4 words fit. None of them fit alone. So I closed the book. And as I closed it, the pages fanned and I saw something near the back, a note, in my own handwriting. I did not remember writing it. It said, "Ask for help before you reach the point where you hate needing it." I froze, because I understood, standing there at 12:30 a.m., that the person I had been fighting to keep out might be the person I was terrified of becoming. A woman who helps and helps until she can't tell where love ends and control begins. That was the moment the story changed shape for me. It stopped being about one night. It became about a pattern. Let me tell you about the pattern, because once I saw it everywhere. The morning after, the house just went on. Coffee brewing at 7, invitations, Bobby's, normal. It almost made me angry. I wanted the world to stop. It refused. Zarelda was at the stove. She looked as tired as I felt, but she asked me something new. She said, "Do you want eggs?" Not "I made eggs," not "you need breakfast." Just "do you want?" 3 words. A tiny door where there used to be a wall. I noticed it. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I noticed. Later she found me in the laundry room, folding a stack of 14 tiny outfits. She stood in the doorway, and she said something real. She said, "I should have asked." I waited. I didn't fill the silence. She said, "Even if I thought I was helping." That was the first time she separated 2 things, her intention and my permission. She finally saw they were not the same. My eyes got hot. And then she added 6 words, "But I need you to understand why." I closed my eyes, because she apologized and she still needed her choice to make sense to me. She couldn't just be sorry. She needed to be understood while being sorry. That is a very human hunger. It also swallows the apology whole. That week, Olivian told me a story. We were in the living room. She was 24 years old, planning a wedding, and she suddenly sounded 14. She told me that as a teenager she had panic attacks before exams, bad ones, and her mother Zarelda did not ask her what she needed. Instead, she built systems, study schedules on the fridge, 2 tutors, flashcards, hundreds of them. Olivian said she hated it every minute, but then she said the twist. "I also passed every exam straight through." I asked, "Did you ever tell her that you hated it?" She laughed a small sad laugh. She said no. I asked why not. And she said the sentence that unlocked the whole family for me. She said, because she looked so happy when she was fixing things. I sat with that for a long time. Olivian was 16 and terrified, and she looked at her own mother who was solving the wrong problem with total joy, and she made a choice. She decided her mother's happiness was worth more than her own honesty. At 16, that is a heavy thing to carry at 16. There it was, everyone in this family stayed quiet to protect the helper. Nobody wanted to take away the joy Zarelda got from saving them, so they let her save them even when they didn't need saving. For 30 years. A whole culture built on kindness that nobody could refuse. And I finally understood why my one awkward second on the couch had mattered so much. When I stood up and stepped between Zarelda and my crying son, I did the one thing nobody in this family had done in 3 decades. I said no with my body. I broke the rule they all lived by. No wonder it felt like an earthquake. To them, it was one. A few days later, I opened my feeding notebook and found something that stopped me. On 3 pages, there were notes that were not mine, neater handwriting. Zarelda's. My first feeling was anger. She had been in my notebook, my private record. Then I read them. She had written, "He calms faster when held upright after feeding," and "She rubs her left ear when tired," and "Both sleep longer after a morning walk." I sat there holding it, because every single note was true, everyone was useful, nothing was invasive, nothing was controlling. They were the notes of a woman paying close attention to 2 bobbies she loved. And that was the whole problem in my hands. The problem was never that she didn't care. The problem was that she cared without ever asking where the line was. She loved right past the fence and didn't feel it go by. Around then, I overheard Kaylan on the phone in the garage. A coworker had asked how things were at home. Kaylan said, "Yeah, just family stuff." Then he said, "My mom and Mireya are both strong personalities." I stopped in the doorway. Strong personalities. He had made us equal. He had turned a boundary problem into a personality clash. 2 stubborn women bumping heads. That framing let him off the hook. If we were just 2 strong people, then nobody was wrong and he never had to choose. Later I asked him, "Do you really think we're the same?" He didn't answer. He looked at the floor for a long time because he didn't know, and not knowing was itself an answer. I went outside and asked Zarelda one question. In the backyard, by the fence, I said, "If you could go back, would you still do it?" She thought about it for a long time, maybe 30 seconds of silence. I expected no. I braced for the clean no. She said, "I don't know." I was stunned. She saw it and explained. She said, "I know I should have asked then, but I also know he was hungry and I was scared." That was the hardest truth of the whole thing. She regretted the boundary she crossed. She did not regret wanting to help. She could hold both. And I realized I was asking her to feel one clean feeling about a moment that had at least 3 feelings inside it. People don't work that way. That same evening, I found an old video on my phone from the hospital. 2 days after the twins were born, I pressed play. I watched myself in the bed, exhausted, crying, puffy, and I heard Kaylan's voice off camera. He asked, "Do you want your mom here or mine?" And I watched myself answer. I said, "No, I don't want anyone thinking I can't do this." I paused the video. My thumb just froze on the screen because I finally saw it. The first wall was not built by Zarelda. It was built by me, on day 2, in a hospital bed. I had locked the door before she ever tried the handle. My "I'm fine" came first, her "I brought this" came after. I watched the frozen frame for a full minute. My own face, 2 days postpartum, already fighting, already deciding that needing anyone meant failing. Nobody taught me that. I taught it to myself somewhere a long time ago, and I brought it into the delivery room with me. I am not telling you this to let Zarelda off. She crossed a line she had no right to cross. Both things are true. She stepped too far in and I had bricked myself in first. Two people both protecting a child, both sure they were right, walking straight into each other in the dark. That is not a villain story. That is a much sadder, more ordinary thing. It is two good people who never learned to say the plain words. I need help. May I help you? 6 words. We could not say them. And it nearly cost us everything. Then came the moment everything turned. It was during wedding planning. A vendor canceled. The florist, 2 weeks out, and I watched my family do the thing they always do. Zarelda picked up the phone and started making calls. Kaylan started negotiating a refund of the $600 deposit. Olivian started apologizing to everyone for a problem she didn't cause. And I watched, and a thought hit me like cold water. Nobody had asked Olivian what she wanted. Nobody. It was her wedding. And 3 people were solving it around her like she was a piece of furniture in the room. They were doing the exact same thing they did to me, helping, fixing, deciding for someone without that someone. I said one word loud. I said, wait. Everyone stopped. 4 faces turned to me. I looked at Olivian. I asked her, what do you want? Silence. She opened her mouth and nothing came out, nothing, because she genuinely did not know. She had spent 24 years having her needs answered before she learned to name them. That was the midpoint. That was when I understood the real thing. The breastfeeding wasn't the disease, it was the symptom. The disease was older and gentler and everywhere. This family loved by guessing. Nobody had ever practiced asking. So I changed, not overnight, but I changed my approach. One morning I sat with the twins, both of them awake and calm. At 9 a.m. the old me would have written a list. Rules, evidence. A 3-point argument to prove I was right. That was my instinct. Protect, control, prepare. Instead, I wrote 3 questions on one index card. Just 3. 1. Did I ask what they needed? 2. Did they ask what I needed? 3. Are we solving a problem or avoiding discomfort? And I sat there and felt something uncomfortable. My instincts at their core were the same as Zarelda's: protect, control, prepare. I was not the opposite of my mother-in-law. I was a younger version of her. That was hard to hold. It was also the truth. The wedding was 2 weeks away and the machine ran at full speed. Zarelda had redesigned the seating chart for 120 guests. She had renegotiated with 3 vendors. She had built emergency schedules minute by minute. Kaylan had arranged transportation for 40 out-of-town guests. He had handled every payment. And Olivian, the bride, had done almost nothing. She sat at the edge of it like a guest at her own event. I asked the room, why isn't the bride deciding this? Everyone stopped. Zarelda said, because she's overwhelmed. I said, did she tell you that? Silence again, that same silence. Nobody had asked. They had decided she was overwhelmed and then treated her like she was. A few days later, Olivian and I were in the car. She was in the passenger seat staring out the window, and she admitted something ugly. She said, sometimes I wait on purpose until Mom decides. I said, why? She said, because then I can either agree or blame her. That was so honest it hurt. She had been letting people take control because choosing meant responsibility. If Zarelda decided and it went wrong, it was Zarelda's fault. Olivian stayed safe by staying small. Her flaw was not weakness. It was hiding. Then it happened again, in my own house. I came home at 5 p.m. and found Zarelda in the nursery. She wasn't holding the bobbies. She wasn't doing anything most people would call wrong. She had redecorated the room. New curtains, blackout ones, new storage bins, 6 of them labeled, a new arrangement of the whole space. She said, I thought the bobbies would sleep better. I looked around, and here is the terrible thing. The room was better, more practical, more beautiful, honestly better than what I had done. The changes were good. That made it harder, not easier. I said, you keep doing things I might appreciate, and you make it impossible to tell you no. She went quiet, really quiet, because she realized right then that was exactly her method, not that she planned it. But her kindness always arrived so complete and so correct that refusing it made you the ungrateful one. She built help that could not be declined, and she had been doing it for 30 years without ever seeing it. Kaylan saw it too, finally. He was in the garage watching old family videos on a laptop, hours of them, and he called me over. He said, "Watch," and I watched. In every clip, the same thing: his mother arranging, his father accepting, Olivian adapting, and a young Kaylan in the middle mediating. His whole childhood was organized around one woman's ability to see what everyone needed before they said it. He said, "I thought my mom was just helpful." He paused. "Then I didn't realize we all stopped practicing how to say no. Not because she demanded it, because everyone let her. It was easier. That is the quiet horror of it. Nobody was forced, everybody agreed for decades." Then came the rehearsal dinner. This is where it cracked in public. It was supposed to be a happy night, 30 people at a long table, candles, a good dinner, but the small decisions kept surfacing. The photographer's schedule, the dinner menu, the seating, and every decision got made by someone other than the bride. Then Olivian saw the final printed program, 200 copies boxed and ready, and her name was spelled wrong, one letter, a tiny thing nobody else noticed. She noticed and she started to cry. Everyone assumed it was stress, wedding nerves. People reached for her murmuring, "It's okay, we'll fix it." But she said something that landed on the whole table. She said, "I don't even recognize my own wedding anymore." Silence, real silence, 30 people, no forks moving. And the old me would have stayed quiet, kept the peace. Not that night. I stood up. I said, "Everyone needs to stop helping for 5 minutes." Every face turned, shocked. I kept going. I said, "Ask her." I pointed at Olivian. "Not what you think she wants, what she wants." Nobody spoke. The candles burned. Finally, Kaylan turned to his sister and asked gently, "What do you want changed?" And Olivian answered, slowly, word by word. For the first time in the whole process, she chose. She said she wanted the first dance moved earlier. She wanted her friend to do a reading. She wanted 10 fewer people at the head table. Small things, hers, all hers. It took her almost 3 minutes to get through the list. 3 minutes for maybe 5 sentences. Because everyone cost her something. Every choice was a muscle she had never used. You could watch her learn it in real time at 26 years old at her own rehearsal dinner in front of 30 people. It was one of the bravest things I have ever seen. And all she did was say what she wanted for dinner. Zarelda sat very still through all of it. She did not jump in. She did not fix. She held a napkin in her lap and let her daughter speak. I saw her knuckles though, white. It was costing her too. Staying quiet was the hardest work she did that whole year. After dinner, Zarelda stood outside the venue alone, in the cold. I found her there. She was looking at the parking lot at nothing. She said, "I didn't realize how much everyone had been letting me decide." I said, "Neither did they." She was quiet, then she asked, "Do you know what hurts?" A pause. "I thought people came to me because they trusted me." Another pause, longer. "Maybe they came to me because it was easier than having a conversation." That one was true, and true things hurt the most. She had spent her whole life believing she was chosen, and she was just convenient. Loved, yes, but leaned on because leaning was easy, not because anyone had decided to choose her out loud on purpose. Now the wedding day, because knowing a pattern exists does not break it. People don't change when it's calm. They change when the exact old situation comes back hot and loud, and they get one more chance to do it differently. The venue was beautiful that morning. Flowers on 12 tables, guests arriving by 10, music being tested, everyone moving. And I noticed something wonderful. Zarelda was not directing. She was standing off to the side, holding a paper cup of coffee, just watching. For the first time in months, she was a guest at her own family's event. I smiled a little. Then a phone rang, and the day fell apart in 3 quick blows. The florist was 90 minutes late. The cake delivery had a problem, and one vendor simply did not show. 3 crises in 5 minutes. And instantly the old reflex woke up. Every head in that room turned towards Zarelda, not because she demanded it, because 30 years of habit turned them. They expected her to fix it. It was automatic, like breathing. She started to move. She picked up her phone. She began making calls, solving, organizing, taking control. It was so smooth, so fast. In 90 seconds, she had the florist rerouted and a backup cake on the way. 90 seconds. Nobody else in that room could have done it in an hour. And I stood there and felt two things at once. Part of me wanted to stop her, and part of me thought quietly, this is why everyone needs her. She was good at it. She was so good. That is the honest truth I have to tell you. Her control was not fake competence. She really could fix anything. The problem was never that she was bad at helping. The problem was that she was so good at it that saying no to her felt insane. Who says no to the person who can solve everything in 90 seconds? Then she stopped, mid-sentence, phone to her ear, because she caught herself. She realized she had not asked anyone. She had just slid back into being necessary. She had become the answer again without anyone choosing her. She put the phone down on the table, face down, and that small motion cost her more than anyone in that room understood. Then the real emergency, the one that had nothing to do with flowers. Olivian disappeared. We looked everywhere for 15 minutes. We found her in a side room, alone, sitting on a folding chair, not crying, not dramatic, just still, overwhelmed in a deep, quiet way. She said, I don't know if I'm nervous about getting married. A pause. Or if I'm nervous because nobody knows how to let me do anything myself. The room went silent because this was not about a wedding anymore. This was 24 years old. And immediately the family tried to fix her. Of course they did, old habits under pressure. Kaylan said, let's postpone the ceremony if you need. Zarelda said, I can handle everything, don't worry. And I said, everyone stop. The room froze. I walked over to Olivian. I crouched down to her level and I asked her one small question. I said, do you want advice? Nobody had asked her that. In 24 years, do you want advice? 4 words, everyone had always just given it. And she started to cry, but not from sadness, from relief. Because for the first time, someone had handed her the choice instead of the answer. She wiped her face and she chose. She said, I want to get married. Everyone relaxed. Then she said, but I want to get married because I chose him, not because everyone organized me into this moment. And then she asked for 3 things, 5 minutes alone, no advice, no fixing. And everyone left the room. For the first time in the whole story, they listened. They gave her the silence she asked for. 4 adults walked out of a room and let one young woman be alone with her own decision. It sounds small. It was enormous. While she was in there, Zarelda found me in the empty hallway. This is the conversation I had waited 5 months for. She said, I keep thinking, if I stop helping, people will stop needing me. I said, maybe. She flinched, I saw it, then I said the other half, I said, but they might start choosing you. That landed. I watched it land, because being needed and being loved are not the same thing. She had spent a lifetime being needed and calling it love. And needed can be replaced, chosen cannot. Then she said it without any explanation attached. For the first time, she said, when I fed Sorrel, I knew I should have asked. Sorrel is my son, my boy, she said his name. Then she said, I just saw a baby who needed something, and I forgot he had a mother. And I cried right there in the hallway, because that was the exact wound, not the feeding, the forgetting. For a few minutes that afternoon in the room where she fed him, I had not existed. My son had a mother and she had disappeared him. And now, 5 months later, she finally saw it and she said it plainly and she did not follow it with a but. That but being gone was the whole apology I had needed. I want to tell you how much that mattered. For 5 months I had been chasing one thing, not punishment, not an eye for an eye, just this. I wanted her to say the true words with nothing attached. No explanation, no emergency, no reason that made it okay, just, I forgot you were his mother and I was wrong. 9 words. That was the whole justice I ever wanted. And when she finally said it, I felt the thing that had come loose inside me 5 months earlier begin slowly to catch again. Not snap back. Nothing snaps back, but catch, hold, begin to knit. She had taken something from me in that guest room without a hand, without a word. And in that hallway she gave it back the only way it could ever be given back. She saw what she had done all the way and she stopped defending it. That is what regret actually looks like. It is quiet. It has no music. It is just a person finally putting down the argument they were carrying. We stood there for a moment, two mothers, one hallway, nothing left to win. The ceremony began at 4 p.m. sunlight through the windows, 120 people seated. And right before Olivian walked down the aisle, she turned to her mother. The old Zarelda would have fixed her dress on instinct, smoothed her hair, straightened the veil, told her how to stand. Instead, Zarelda asked, "Do you want me to?" 4 words, and Olivian smiled and said, "Yes." So Zarelda fixed the veil, same action she always would have done, completely different meaning. One was taken, this one was given. That is the entire difference. That is the whole thing I learned in one small motion by a doorway. At the reception later, someone asked Zarelda a question, a cousin, "What should we do next, cut the cake or first dance?" Everyone waited because everyone still expected her to decide. It was reflex even now. The old answer would have been instant. She would have chosen for all of us. Instead, she looked around the room, and she said, "I don't know, what does everyone want?" People laughed because it sounded so strange coming from her. It sounded like a foreign language in her mouth, but she meant it. She actually meant it. And a small conversation happened and a group of adults picked something together and the world did not end. Then later that night I did something. I picked up Sorrel and I walked over to Zarelda and I handed him to her. Not because she reached for him, not because she took him, because I chose to. I placed my son in his grandmother's arms on purpose with my eyes open as a gift and not a surrender. It was the same picture as 5 months before, a grandmother holding a baby, but it was the opposite in every way that mattered, and we both knew it. Neither of us said a word, we didn't have to. That was the climax, not a confrontation. Nobody was defeated, nobody won. The thing that changed was invisible from the outside. Love without listening had been quietly turning into control, and we caught it. Late, but we caught it. Now let me finish, because a wedding is a high and highs are easy. The real test is the ordinary Tuesday when there is no crisis and nobody is watching. Do you still ask then? 1 week after the wedding, our house was silent. For the first time in months. No wedding calls, no vendors, no relatives coming and going, no boxes, just me, Kaelan, and the twins, 6 months old now, on a blanket on the floor. And I felt something strange. I missed parts of the chaos. I did, because before everything broke, I had felt loved. Surrounded. The problem was never that people cared. The problem was that nobody knew the exact minute care turned into control. And that minute is different for every person, so the only way to find it is to ask. There is no other way, there never was. I sat on the floor with the twins for an hour that first quiet night. No phone, no plans, just the 3 of us in a pile of soft blocks. And I understood that I had spent 5 months learning the wrong lesson at first. For a while I thought the answer was walls. Keep everyone out, do it all alone, prove I didn't need anyone. But that road just leads back to a hospital bed and an "I'm fine" nobody believes. The real answer was smaller and harder. Not walls, doors with a person standing at them who gets to say yes or no. That is so much more work than a wall you build once. A door you have to answer every single day. That evening, Kaelan washed bottles at the sink, 12 of them. I watched his back. And he said, without turning around, "I used to think staying neutral was the fair thing." I looked at him. He said, "But sometimes neutral just means the person with the louder habit keeps winning." That was his whole arc in one sentence over a sink of soapy water. He admitted he had seen it all along. The nursery changes, the schedules, the decisions made without me, and every time he had told himself 4 words. Mom means well. And that little sentence had allowed everything. It was the softest, most loving excuse in the world, and it cost me 5 months. He dried his hands on a towel and turned around. He said, "I owe you something." I waited. He said, "Not a fix, an apology." And he gave me one, a real one. He said he had spent his whole life keeping the peace between his mother and everyone else, and he had gotten so good at it that he stopped noticing who paid for the peace. It was always the quiet one. For 30 years it was Olivian. This year it was me. He said one more thing that stayed with me. He said, I kept trying to be fair to both of you, but you weren't in the same position. You were the one holding a boundary. She was the one crossing it. Fair to both of you meant unfair to you. That was the whole thing he had missed. Understanding two sides is not the same as balancing them. Sometimes one side is standing on the other side's foot, and you don't ask them both to be more patient. You ask one of them to step off. A few days after that, there was a knock at the door around 6 in the evening. I opened it. Zarelda stood there and her hands were empty. No grocery bags, no food containers, no charger, no plans. Just her. For the first time in my memory, she arrived carrying nothing. I almost laughed. She saw my face and she said, I was going to bring soup. A pause. Then I decided to ask first. A small joke, a whole new person underneath it. I opened the door wider and I let her in. We sat in the living room, and there were no speeches, no dramatic forgiveness, no crying. We just made some simple agreements, plain ones. Before she assumed, now she would ask. 3 questions became our whole new language. Do you want advice? Do you want me to hold him? Do you want me to fix this? And sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no, and both answers are allowed now. That was the deal, not that she stops helping, that her help waits for a yes. The yes is the whole thing. The yes is everything. Months later, I opened the old feeding notebook again. Sorrel and his sister were nearly a year old. I turned the pages. The first ones were mine, blue pen, small letters, times to the minute. The middle pages had her notes, the ones I'd been so angry about. And then I turned to the last written page. There was a new sentence, her handwriting. She wrote, Today I asked before helping. And under it I had added a line of my own. I wrote, Today I let someone help. We were both learning the opposite lesson. She was learning to hold back. I was learning to let go. 2 women meeting in the middle from opposite sides. The notebook held both. Same book that had started all of it. I ran my thumb over both lines for a while. Her sentence and mine, one under the other, 2 different handwritings on one page. For 5 months that notebook had been my fortress. It was where I hoarded every fact about my bobbies so nobody could tell me I didn't know them. And now it had a second author in it, and I was okay with that. I was more than okay. The page felt fuller than it ever had when it was only mine. And then the last thing, the evening I think of when I think of us now, it was nothing. That is the point. We were in the living room. The twins were on the floor with a pile of toys. I was sitting cross-legged near them. Zarelda was in the armchair close by. It was around 7 p.m. quiet. One of the bobbies dropped a rattle. It rolled 2 feet across the wood floor and stopped. And the old Zarelda would have been up and across the room in half a second. Picked it up, handed it back, fixed it before anyone asked. That was who she was for 60 years. Everyone in the room noticed the toy. There was a small pause. I watched her. She looked at the rattle, then she looked at me, and she asked, Do you want me to get that? I smiled. I said yes. And she picked it up and handed it to my daughter. Nothing dramatic happened. No music swelled. Nobody clapped. Because the difference between the old life and the new one is completely invisible from the outside. It is the same woman picking up the same toy. The only thing that changed is a single question asked out loud first. Before, she helped because she decided to. Now she helps because she was invited to. That is the entire distance we traveled. 5 months, 1 wedding, 1 broken trust, and 1,000 small conversations. All of it to move from deciding to asking. It doesn't sound like much. It was the whole world. I used to think boundaries were walls, things we build to keep people out. I really believed that. I thought a good boundary meant a locked door and a person on the other side of it. I understand now that I was wrong. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. And the strongest families are not the ones where nobody ever crosses them. There is no such family. People will always reach for the people they love. The strong ones are simply the families where people have learned how to knock. That's all. That's the whole secret. You don't stop reaching for each other, you just learn to knock first, and you wait, and you let the answer be no sometimes. My mother-in-law breastfed my baby without asking. That is where this started. It is a sentence that still makes people gasp, but it was never really about that afternoon in the guest room. It was about a family that loved each other so much and so loudly that we forgot to ever ask each other a single simple question. Is this what you want? We ask now, every day. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it is no, and both are allowed. That is the whole repair. It took 5 months, one wedding, and a broken thing between two mothers. But we learned it. And it turns out that question asked in time is the most loving thing any of us ever learned to say.